Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 732 for the 16th of October, 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia, where the weather is. Let me look out the window. Oh, wow, sunny, blue skies, sunny day. It's a good thing. It's a very good thing because there's been a lot of rain around lately, especially for my dear friends in Victoria and Melbourne especially, which suffered terrible floods over the last few days. In fact, our reporter down in Melbourne, Michelle Bickersma, tells me that with photographs that there was major flooding right behind her school where she teaches. It looked dramatic, and it's still going on. So our thoughts are certainly with our dear friends in Melbourne. But what's coming up on the Skeptic Zone this week? I catch up with my old friend Brian Dunning from the Skeptoid podcast. And Brian's going to bring us up to date on his movie project, the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. Brian will discuss the process of making this movie and the ups and downs of making any documentary, I guess. I'm very much looking forward to this documentary. I've contributed, I've supported the movie, but find out more about this whole process and what it is all about coming up at the top of the show. Following that, in the Trove segment, keeping with the UFO theme, we look at the disappearance of pilot Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old pilot who disappeared over Bass Strait, which is the body of water between the Australian mainland and the island state of Tasmania. In 1978, he disappeared, but he reported, just before he disappeared, seeing what many people believe to this day was an alien spaceship. We look to the newspaper records of the time to find out more about the Frederick Valentich case. Then to round off the show, I chat to Jarana Buttigieg and Tom Carruthers from the Australian Science Communicators. And this is the peak body for science communication and science journalists in Australia. Very important to be able to communicate science. Now, later today, I hope to be making my way downtown in Sydney to once again visit the Festival of Mind, Body, Spirit. Oh, it's back again. Yes, Mind, Body, Wallet, back again. Who knows what I'll discover this time. But now it's time for me to run downstairs, have a look in the fridge. Any leftover ravioli, I wonder? While I investigate that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Oh yes, that strange music can mean only one thing. We're going to be discussing UFOs, and we're going to be discussing UFOs with a man who's been interested, as I have been, in UFOs probably since the 1970s, all the way from the beautiful city of Bend in Oregon. It's the host of Skeptoid, Brian Dunning. Hello, Brian.
Hello, Richard.
UFOs, Brian. What is it? Come on now, what is it about people, men of a certain age, I don't want to say that, but people of a certain era, and others, of course, we still have this fascination, don't we?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that I have I did when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was, as I've said many times, my bookshelf was all ghost books and Bigfoot books and UFO books, and I believed every word of everything in all those books. But since then, especially in the last, 16 years since I've been doing Skeptoid, I would say my fascination with any of those topics has turned to jaded acceptance.
I hear you, and I know exactly what you mean.
But you're right. You're right that there's a lot of interest in it, though.
There still is.
Here in the U.S., they're talking about it in Congress.
Yeah.
They're making official government committees about UFOs. And my gosh, if you get into any of the UFO forums or the Twitter communities, it's unbelievable how much interest and how much passion there is. A huge number of people seem to be, well, in fact, 40% of Americans, according to a recent poll, 40% of Americans believe that the Earth is actively visited by aliens. That's a huge number. And of those people who are active in these online communities, some of them are extremely passionate.
Well, I hear you, and I get this. We see it in other realms, especially in the conspiracy theory people who get extremely passionate about their particular conspiracy theory. Dare we say so passionate that they're willing to storm the Capitol building in the United States, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one example of it. I haven't seen the UFO people storming any buildings yet, but I'm not kidding. I have seen people talking about it because they believe that the government is suppressing all this information, and they always set deadlines for when they believe disclosure is coming. It's just like the people who talk about, the rapture is going to be September 15th of next year, whenever it is. There's always some date for it, and for the end of the world, and for UFO disclosure. They always believe it happens. The dates always come and go, and nothing interesting happens.
Which is interesting because a year ago, I suppose, I wrote an article for the Skeptic magazine here in Australia called Any Day Now, which outlined the fact that cults, religious cults and others for centuries have said, any day now, X will happen. Any day now, this God will appear. Any day now, the government will disclose the fact that UFOs are visiting the Earth. And of course, the any day never eventuates.
Right.
But anyway, what will eventuate, folks, and the reason I'm chatting to Brian today is to catch up with you, Brian, about the movie project that I've been following for some time now. And this is your UFO movie called the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. Now, when I visited you earlier in the year, we visited a local observatory and we filmed your, I don't want to say Kickstarter, your promo, your here we go, folks. Here,
it was basically a crowdfunding video.
Crowdfunding, that's the word.
What the movie is going to be about, and it was an Indiegogo campaign.
Right.
It was enough to get me started anyway.
So we filmed that, and you edited that together into a nice little promo, put it out there, and ever since then, ever since I saw you last, you've been concentrating much of your time on this project. How about an update for the aliens and the listeners out there?
Yep. So, well, for anyone who wants ongoing updates, because the movie is about halfway through with production right now, and it's you can just go to briandunning.com/UFO. And there's a little place you can sign up for email spams that you can unsubscribe from. Yeah. But I got a little blog on there with pictures of the production and what's going on and everything. It's been a lot of travel. I started off going to Washington, D.C. I was down in Folsom, California, Rancho Cordova, California, Sun River, Oregon. I went back and shot something at that same observatory where you and I were.
Right.
And then let's see. Next, I'm going, well, of course, we got SciCon coming up this week. As soon as that's done, then I'm going to Texas, Fort Davis, Texas, where there's an observatory. Plains, Georgia, home of Jimmy Carter, who saw a UFO once.
Oh, yes.
Woodstock, Georgia, and then probably Madras, Oregon, and possibly Wyoming. And that should cover all of the location stuff. The rest of it is all being done here locally. There's some studio stuff and some stuff in the local hills.
I've been to Madras, Oregon. What is that a known spot for UFOs?
No, it's a place where there's an air museum, which is a place that I might use as a set for some interviews.
because apart from the Sun River Observatory, you and I actually attempted to film at another observatory, which was a fabulous little outing for us. We jumped in the car and we drove some hours up into the hills, and we had a beautiful afternoon visiting another observatory. But it turned out the
Pine Mountain Observatory.
Yes, but it turned out we couldn't use that footage after all, but I don't care because it was such an interesting trip. So you've been traveling.
I've been meeting people who are astrophysicists, people who are in the military, people who are in defense, people who are in air traffic control, air crash investigation, a bunch of people like that. And they're all very level-headed, grounded individuals with a lot of really good information. So I think I'd be giving the wrong impression to say I'm meeting some colorful, interesting characters.
Well, that makes quite a change from your average UFO documentary, I think, right there.
Well, I think it does for sure. Yeah. I was super hesitant to go with the title, the UFO movie they don't want you to see.
Mm.
You know, it was when you're trying to come up with a title for the movie. I mean, first of all, something like this, 1 billion UFO movies have been made.
Yeah.
Almost all credulous, low budget things. And they've used every conceivable title that has the word UFO or flying saucer in it or anything. And I wanted to come up with something that was unique, but also something that grabs attention.
Yeah.
And so I had maybe around 20 titles, and I did a whole bunch of workshopping and surveying people, and people were voting on them. And this one was the standout winner. And even though I felt that it sounded kind of silly and kind of like it might be a conspiracy theory movie, it's also fun.
Mm-hmm.
It gets attention, and it has the word UFO in it, which is important.
Yes. Oh,
so,
yes.
So the title's really grown on me.
Now, folks, apart from me being a very willing assistant to Brian a few months ago when we filmed the little promo, I've actually put my money where my mouth is, and I've donated. I don't think donating is the right word, Brian. I've contributed. I've supported. I'm a supporter of the project. And
yes, you are.
Which entitles me to get my name in the credits. So I'm looking forward to watching the movie just to see my name in the credits. But you mentioned all the travel. You've obviously had some expenses. You've bought some gear. And this is really due to the fact that there are people out there all around the world who have supported this endeavor.
Yeah, it's the budget is going to be it was projected at 70,000. It's going to land right at about 70,000, maybe a little bit under.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's going to go over. And I've raised most of that, about 50, 55, I believe. So the pain points are the color, the sound, and the scoring, all of which are going to get done. It's just going to be a matter of, am I going to be able to pay something close to a market rate and get decent quality? People don't realize that having an actual post house go through and do the color properly, having actual audio engineers fix the sound and make it sound good, and then, of course, scoring of the movie. People really don't realize how much that adds. It really does take it from anything that you might just watch on YouTube or something to the really professional presentation of something that's on a high-quality TV streaming channel, for example. And this movie's intended to be up there with the good stuff. So I want it to be as good as it can be. So there's still absolutely options to contribute. We still have special thanks credits, associate producer, executive producer credits that are available. There are limited numbers of those because you can't make it look like fake credits or anything like that. But that's basically what producers do these days, is they come up with the money for a film. So that's exactly what we're doing. So if you want to help be a producer of the UFO movie they don't want you to see, come to briandunning.com/UFO.
There you are, listeners to the Skeptic Zone. If you want to be part of this very interesting project by Brian Dunning, and if you, like me, you have a fondness, a nostalgia for UFOs, that's the place to go to. You can still be a supporter. Now, Brian, coming up on this episode of the Skeptic Zone, in fact, right after this interview, I'm going to discuss the Frederick Valentich UFO mystery, that poor young pilot who disappeared in 1978 over the Bass Strait here in Australia. And I referenced Skeptoid because you did a whole episode on Frederick Valentich. How often over the years do UFOs occur in your Skeptoid journey?
Oh, several a year. I've just got one. Did it just come out? Yeah, I think it just came out either this week or the week before on a famous Brazilian case called the Varginha UFO, which someone tipped me that there was a documentary coming out, and I've been able to do this several times. I've been able to scoop the documentary by getting a factual episode that tells what actually happened, so people have that as a resource by the time the TV show drops.
Oh, wow.
In fact, Maynard, I believe it was Maynard who tipped me off years and years ago to a documentary about the the Westall
UFO in Melbourne in the 1960s, where a group of many school children apparently witnessed an alien craft landing or hovering or something. Yes, I remember you did an episode about that. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so we were able to scoop that documentary as well, which was great. And that was some fascinating stuff. There was some really neat stuff involved in that one.
Yes, I remember that episode well, because folks, yes, every week I make sure I listen to Skeptoid. And I think the conclusion you arrived at was it's quite possible that the school children saw a military drogue or some exercises or military exercises taking place that day.
Yeah, it was a drogue,
Yeah.
not a drone. It was literally like a windsock that is towed behind a small plane, and other student pilots in small planes try to follow it as closely as they can. And this was actually going on at a was it a Royal Air Force? What do you call it?
Yeah,
You're not the RAF. You're not the USAF.
We are the RAFF.
RAFF. Thank you.
Yes.
There was a location right near the school where that was apparently happening at the time, and there was another part of the sighting where there was something seen floating along. And other researchers before me long ago had tracked that down to a specific weather balloon that was known to have been launched and was known to have followed that exact course. So really, that was a very neatly solved by other people long before me.
And of course, even to this day, there are still documentaries and the odd special come on TV about that very incident, and you will never convince the true believers of any other theory apart from it was an alien spaceship visiting the planet Earth.
Yeah, it's that whole part of convincing that is so important to do. Like with my UFO movie, at briandunning.com/UFO, I'm not preaching to the choir,
right?
Because preaching to the choir, although that may please people who are contributing donors to the project or whatever, preaching to the choir does not accomplish anything at all. It's really a complete waste of time and money and resources. You're only doing some good if you're reaching the people who need to be reached and convincing the people who need to be convinced and getting them to start admitting a science-based view, to start informing their beliefs a little bit. So that's what I'm doing with this. That's why it's not a debunking film also. It's a science presentation that starts off on very hopeful notes. Yes, we know that there is a lot of life in the universe, or it's at least the overwhelming consensus.
Yes.
We know that there is almost certainly technological civilizations out there. We know that from exoplanet studies that we're just starting to do, we know that the Earth's spectrum is about as attractive a spectrum as is imaginable for some hypothetical alien astrobiologists who are out there who are looking through their telescopes and looking for an interesting planet. They're going to see Earth and they're going to go, wow, that planet has got to have life, because you've got all the water in our spectrum, you've got the chlorophyll in our spectrum. Those are really important. And so that's a very hopeful note to open on. And that's all absolutely true and absolutely science-based.
Yes.
Now, there are real problems, of course, associated with long-distance space travel, faster than light travel, the amount of time it would take to get somewhere. And so through the course of this, we end up on talking about, here's the way that we will be in touch with alien civilizations.
Wow.
So it's going to be completely 100% solid science, and it's not going to debunk, it's not going to be credulous, it's not going to de-educate anyone the way that most of these documentaries are intended to do. I think it's going to be a very worthwhile project. I'm really proud to be doing it.
Wow, that's certainly whetting my appetite, Brian. And before I go, and maybe you can spend a moment just telling our listeners about the pits and the perils and the traps and the bits and pieces about documentary filmmaking. I noticed, some time ago you posted something up on Facebook about the woes of the PAL system versus the NTSC system. Now, the PAL system is used in televisions in Europe, Australia, much of the world, and of course the NTSC system is used in North America. But you discovered this the hard way, I think.
I did, yes. So I'm using, there's 3 cameras, and I'm doing most of the production on most of these setups myself. If I'm going somewhere to just interview one person, going to spend about 90 minutes setting up all the lights, setting up all the cameras, the microphones and everything. And then we do the interview, which takes 5 minutes, and then an hour cleaning everything up again. So it's a 3-camera shoot. And I had 1 camera, and I ordered 2 more of the exact same identical camera, numbered them 1, 2, and 3, got all the chips and all the batteries and everything, and was sitting down. I like to leave myself one task to do in the hotel room the night before the shoot. So I have something to occupy myself with, and so I don't have to cram quite so hard. And what I decided to leave as the last minute thing was configuring the cameras, because you got to go through the menus and there's a lot of settings that have to be set and everything. And in doing so, I very quickly learned that these were PAL cameras, not NTSC. The problem with that is they only shot 25 frames per second. This is all being shot in 30 frames per second because it's going to go to streaming services. And that is an enormous disaster. That's an enormous disaster. There's no way around it. You can't take that 25 frame footage and get acceptable professional quality results from it if they have to be converted to 30. So, I mean, I was just, this is now 11, 12 o'clock at night in the hotel, and we're shooting at like 9 in the morning. So first of all, I looked to see if there were any cameras available at any retail stores that I could just go to first thing, delay the shoot a couple hours if necessary. I didn't care if it was 100 miles away. I'd get there and back. And no, there were not. It was not possible to buy any more cameras around. So I found on the internet that you could, there was a firmware hack to convert these cameras from PAL to NTSC. Well, to do that firmware hack, you need a Windows PC and a USB interface and internet connection and all this stuff. Well, I didn't have any of those things at this hotel. I only travel with my iPad. And the hotel had, I won't go into this whole thing. It was an incredible comedy of errors. It started with me calling the hotel front desk and saying, hey, is there any chance you guys have a business center with a Windows PC? And he says, let me go check. I thought, gee, shouldn't he know that? But he comes back and says, no, it's not Windows or Macs. They're just regular computers.
What?
So I knew that he was not going to be a great tech support resource for me. But to make a very long story short, I did get the firmware hack applied very early the next morning. But there were so many other things wrong that it was just a crazy, crazy night. And I'm continuing to use those same 2 cameras because I still haven't been able to get any replacements for them. But
you successfully applied the firmware, and now they're shooting in NTSC.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. How about that?
Apparently, there's no actual hardware difference in the cameras. It's all just firmware.
I'm glad you were able to do that, because I read your message and I thought, oh no, poor Brian.
That was so and so I'm no longer leaving things like that as my last minute task just to occupy myself for fun in the hotel.
The wonders, the magic, folks, of show business and video production is just never ending. Okay, I'm going to link, folks, to those URLs Brian mentioned, where you can find out more about the UFO movie they don't want you to see, and you can still be a supporter, which is very important. And I will link to the episode of the Westall 66 UFO case Brian covered in Skeptoid, and also the Frederick Valentich case, because we're just about to discuss this very case coming up in the Trove segment on the Skeptic Zone. Brian, good to catch up with you. Congratulations on lots of happy family news lately, ups and downs, but life goes on.
For sure.
But for now, Brian Dunning, all the way there in Bend in Oregon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's always lots of fun to talk with you.
Hello, this is Maynard. Did you know that you can listen to the Skeptic Zone on YouTube? Yes, I know, sounds crazy, but it's true. Also, you can hear 40 logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma and funny sketches with Richard Saunders and a host of other skeptics. Just click on the YouTube links on the homepage at skepticzone.tv.
It's time once again to dive into those archives at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia. Thank you to those people for collecting and publishing online digitised newspapers, articles, gazettes, journals going back many, many decades. And it might interest you to know that since I started this segment on the show, subjects covered have been, and you can look these up. If you go to skepticzone.tv and click the episode's link at the top of the next page, you'll see a search box, and you can put in any of these searches and find the episode in question. The topics we've looked at have included the Ben Spoon Award, clairvoyance, yowie hunts, UFOs, Ouija boards, haunted houses, quackery, ESP, the Loch Ness Monster, James Randi, water divining, Uri Geller, astrology, I might repeat some things here, biorhythms, Carl Sagan, Harry Houdini, superstitions, debunking, telekinesis, poltergeist, the National Centre for Science Education, alien abductions, the Scopes Monkey Trial, the New Age, the Full Moon, the occult, the Flat Earth, Jack the Ripper, witchcraft, paranormal research, the 1919 flu, palm reading, evil curses, aliens and UFOs, Halloween, acupuncture, Reiki, homeopathy, seances, orgone energy, cancer quacks, crop circles, remote viewing, Curlian photography, numerology, unsolved mysteries, psychic detectives, reflexology, psychic scams, astrology again, alien abductions again, pyramid power, Ray Hyman, Min lights, Bermuda Triangle, the Zodiac, telepathy, ESP, Cabrina Kincaid, ghosts in Canada, psychic surgery, and more. But today we're going to look at a mystery from 1978 here in Australia concerning UFOs and missing aircraft. This is the disappearance of pilot Frederick Valentich. Now, if we start our session today over at Wiki, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich. Frederick Valentich was an Australian pilot who disappeared while on a 125 nautical mile training flight in a Cessna 182L light aircraft. Registration, Victor Hotel, Delta Sierra Juliet. And this occurred over Bass Strait on Saturday the 21st of October 1978. Bass Strait is the body of water separating the Australian mainland from the state of Tasmania. The report here says, described as a flying saucer enthusiast, 20-year-old Valentich informed Melbourne Air Traffic Control that he was being accompanied by an aircraft at about 1,000 feet above him and that his engine began roughly idling or roughly running before finally reporting it's not an aircraft. There were belated reports of a UFO sighting in Australia on the night of the disappearance. However, the Associated Press reported that the Department of Transport was sceptical. The UFO was behind Valentich's disappearance and that some of their officials speculated that, quote, Valentich became disorientated and saw his own lights reflected in the water or lights from a nearby island while flying upside down, end quote. And at the time of recording, the disappearance occurred 43 years, 11 months and 17 days ago. Which means that if Frederick Valentich was still alive today, he'd be in his early 60s. It's widely supposed that the unfortunate Valentich died after his plane crashed on that night way back in 1978. However, it's the radio communication Valentich had with air traffic control which raised speculation at the time of alien spacecraft, and this was largely due, in my opinion, to the era. 1978 was in the middle of a UFO hype, UFO craze, sparked largely by the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But the 1970s were full of all sorts of reports of paranormal things, from spoon bending to Ouija boards to ghosts to whatever, but especially UFOs. Various proposals have been put forward. James McGarr and Joe Nickel, writing for Skeptical Inquirer in December 2013, have published a report which I'll link to in the show notes, which concludes that in all probability Valentich confused planets and stars for an aircraft in his disorientated state. And the report they've written, which I'll link to, goes on to say that the various stars and planets were in the correct formation at the time that could have confused him. And given that he was a UFO enthusiast, he might have leapt to the conclusion that it was an aircraft or a UFO following him or hovering about him. And I find the conclusion here not unreasonable. Brian Dunning, in his Skeptoid episode of some years ago, concluded that Valentich was carried away by his interest in UFOs and was repeating some of the lines he could have heard in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In any situation, wreckage some years later, was found on an island in Bass Strait consistent with the aircraft. So it's widely suspected he went into a spiral, crashed into the ocean, and sadly most of the aircraft and Valentich himself have been lost. Now, here on the page from the Skeptical Inquirer is a transcript of the radio communication between Valentich and the air traffic control, and reading it, and given the time, UFOs were very popular, one can easily see how people could leap to the conclusion that it was an alien spacecraft. But let's look at some of the newspaper reports about the incident at the time. And our first report comes from the Canberra Times, dated Monday the 23rd of October 1978, only a few days after the disappearance. And it might interest you to know that the Canberra Times cost the princely sum of 13 cents, or 14 cents if you were in Sydney and Melbourne. Missing pilot reported UFO, quote, playing with Cessna, end quote. Melbourne. A pilot missing in Bass Strait reported being buzzed by an unidentified flying object for a quarter of an hour before losing radio contact with Melbourne air traffic controllers, a Department of Transport spokesman said yesterday. The department's public relations officer, Mr. Ken Williams, said the pilot radioed air traffic controllers at 7 p.m. on Saturday and reported an aircraft flying below him at about 4,500 feet. Mr. Williams said the controllers told the pilot there was no other aircraft in the area. The pilot then asked control to check if it could be an Air Force aircraft, considering the speed it was travelling. The controllers reported no other aircraft, including Air Force aircraft in the area. The pilot then told controllers the object was long and metallic, with 4 bright lights on top, and appeared to be playing with the Cessna. The pilot's last communication with ground control was that he was having trouble with one engine after the object had hovered above him for some time, but he was heading towards King Island. The department believed it was possible the pilot was disoriented and was flying his aircraft upside down during the conversation with ground control. It was possible the pilot was seeing the lights of Cape Otway lighthouse and that of King Island as he was flying inverted in the early evening. However, the department had not discounted the possibility of an unidentified flying object, although there had been no other reports of anything unusual in the area. An RAAF, which is the Royal Australian Air Force, Orion Search aircraft spotted an oil slick in the area the light aircraft is believed to have gone down. The search would resume at first light in the area of the slick where the Orion dropped a marker buoy, or buoy. The missing pilot is Mr. Frederick Valentich of Avondale Heights, Melbourne. Sequence of events and radio exchanges with air traffic controllers. On page 3, so we'll turn to page 3. Pilot's UFO report. The following is a sequence of events and exchanges between the missing pilot and the air traffic controllers. At 7 p.m. on Saturday, the aircraft reported over Cape Otway that he was proceeding to King Island. At 7:06 p.m. the pilot asked Melbourne Air Flight Service if there was any known traffic in the area below 5,000 feet. Flight Service replied, "No known traffic in your area." The pilot then called up and said there seemed to be a large aircraft below 5,000 feet. Flight Service requested the type of aircraft, and the pilot replied, "I cannot confirm. It has 4 bright lights that appear to be landing lights. The aircraft has passed over me about 1,000 feet above." Flight Service then queried him, "Is it a large aircraft?" The pilot responded in the affirmative. "And at the speed it's travelling, are there any RAAF aircraft in the vicinity?" Flight Service said no. At 7:08 p.m. the pilot again called up and said, "It's approaching from due east towards me. It seems to me to be playing some sort of game. It's flying at a speed I cannot estimate." Flight Service queried his altitude, and the pilot replied, 4,500 feet. Flight Service then asked him, "Can you confirm you can't identify the aircraft?" The pilot replied, affirmative. At 7:09 p.m. the pilot called up again and said, "It's not an aircraft, it's..." And there was a temporary break in transmission. Flight Service again called and said, "Can you describe the aircraft?" The pilot replied, "It is flying past. It is a long shape. I cannot identify more than that. It's coming for me right now." At 7:10 p.m. Flight Service asked him how large it was, and the pilot replied, "It seems to be stationary. I'm orbiting, and the thing is orbiting on top of me also. It has a green light and sort of metallic light on the outside." A few seconds later, the pilot told Flight Service that the object had vanished. Flight Service then asked him to confirm that the object had vanished. The pilot confirmed and then asked, "Do you know what type of aircraft I've got? Is it military?" Flight Service responded, "No known military traffic in the area." At 7:12 p.m. the pilot told Flight Service his engine was rough idling and was coughing. The Flight Service then asked him his intentions. The pilot replied that he was proceeding to King Island, adding, "Unknown aircraft hovering on top of me." Flight Service then acknowledged that call. Then came a long metallic noise over the radio, and communication with the aircraft was lost. The pilot's father, Mr. Guido Valentich, said he believed the Department of Transport was, quote, "trying to cover up so people won't get alarmed," end quote. So you can imagine the interest that this story sparked at the time, again, given it was during one of the UFO crazes. And of course there was, as there would be in any situation, various searches conducted. And we pick up the story a few days later on Wednesday the 25th of October, again from the Canberra Times. Wider search for missing aircraft. Melbourne. The Department of Transport stepped up yesterday the search for a light aircraft which disappeared last Saturday night after a mysterious, quote, UFO incident, end quote, over Bass Strait. 4 twin-engine aircraft joined a long-range marine version of the Nomad over the area from Cape Schanck to a point 50 kilometres east of King Island and across to Cape Otway. The pilot of the aircraft, Mr. Frederick Valentich, 20, vanished over Bass Strait in his blue and white Cessna 182 after reporting a mystery craft hovering above him. However, his father, Mr. Guido Valentich, who still believes he may be alive, said he thought it was possible his son had been taken by a spacecraft. As the mystery surrounding the incident deepened yesterday, Melbourne radio stations and newspapers were flooded with calls from people reporting strange lights and possible UFO sightings in the past week. The search will continue today. And the next report is a few days later on Sunday, the 29th of October, again from the Canberra Times, 1978. Son alive, says pilot's father. And you can imagine the pain and the torment and the hope and the despair and everything that any family of a missing pilot or missing people would go through. Melbourne. The father of missing pilot, Mr. Frederick Valentich, denied yesterday that his son had staged his disappearance. "I think he is still alive," Mr. Guido Valentich said as a Department of Transport aircraft resumed the search for Mr. Frederick Valentich, 20, who went missing in a light aircraft on a flight to King Island off the Victorian coast a week ago. Mr. Valentich said he believed his son had been taken by an unidentified flying object. When asked where his son might be, Mr. Valentich replied, "Your guess is as good as mine. All I am worried about is that he was released in a different area, very far away from where he was taken." Mr. Valentich took a week off from work to keep a vigil by his telephone to await news of his son, who worked for the Air Training Corps on a voluntary basis and spent a lot of time preparing for his commercial pilot's license. Mr. Valentich said a Rosanna man contacted him on Friday to say that he had sighted the same UFO as his son. Mr. Valentich said he had arranged to meet the man, 58, an engineering firm worker, on Tuesday. A twin-engine Aero Commander aircraft from Moorabbin Airport made sweeps of Victoria's southwest coast between Torquay and Peterborough yesterday. A spokesman for the Department of Transport said, "They are looking to see if anything has been washed ashore. If anything is found which can be positively identified as coming from the plane, the search will be reactivated." It was announced on Friday that tests on oil found in Bass Strait in the area Mr. Valentich is believed to have disappeared showed it was marine oil and not from an aircraft. Now, you can imagine there are many more reports in various newspapers about this story. Again, well, it was a missing aircraft, and that would normally make the news, but coupled with possible UFO connections. But sadly, we find another report here, and it's from the Australian Associated Press, as reported in the pages of the Papua New Guinea Post-Courier on the Friday, the 27th of October, 1978. Called off. Melbourne, Thursday. The Bass Strait search for an aircraft which disappeared in unusual circumstances last weekend has been called off, though investigators still are completely baffled by the tragedy. The plane, a Cessna 182, disappeared last Saturday night while on a night flight to King Island off the Victorian coast. The pilot, Frederick Valentich, reported a strange craft hovering above him shortly before radio contact was lost. Frederick Valentich, who disappeared all the way back in 1978. And it appears most likely that he did become disoriented and possibly was flying upside down, mistook lights for something else. But sadly, ultimately, it appears he did crash into the ocean. But of course, you can find out about all sorts of UFO mysteries and other mysteries and things like that by looking in the pages at trove@nla.gov.au, because you never know what you might find.
The Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention, Skepticon 2022, will be held on December 3rd through 4th, the first weekend of December. Go to the ticket sales page at skepticon.org.au to choose full in-person one day in person, or streaming options. The event will be held at the National Library of Australia. The theme is Skepticism in a Changed World, and the lineup of speakers includes Claire Klingenberg, President of the European Council of Skeptical Organizations, the hosts of European Skeptics podcast, and live stream talks by Skeptics Guide to the Universe host, Dr. Stephen Novella, and Skeptoid host, Brian Dunning. There is also a wide variety of domestic speakers, including Major General Mike Ryan, retired, who will be speaking on science fiction and security professionals, author David Dufty on Radio Girl, ACT Academy of Sport psychologist Christine Dunn on superstitions in sport, controversial author Clive Hamilton on being censored, and many more scientific and skeptical topics. For full details, visit skepticon.org.au.
Well, folks, science communication is really important. It's been important for me for over 20 years, communicating science ideas to the general public when it comes to skepticism. But what about science ideas generally, in the broader sense? Joining me on the line from Canberra, we have two people very interested in science communication. We have Joanna Buttigieg and Tom Carruthers from the Australian Science Communicators. Hello.
Hello.
G'day, how are you?
I'm very well. It's good to see you because we're seeing each other as people do these days over the magic of the interwebs. And I've been put in touch with you by our mutual friend Kevin Davies in Canberra, who is running the Australian Skeptics National Convention, to have a chat about science communication. Now, it says here, quoting from the website, the Australian Science Communicators is the peak body for science communicators and science journalists in Australia, established in 1994. The Australian Science Communicators has grown into a national network of more than 1,650 subscribers and 450 financial members working in science and technology communication, and it goes on. Tell me, what's it all about? Why is it so important that scientists communicate, and why do they need a network like this?
So it's actually really, really interesting. There are different fields of what people call themselves a science communicator and individuals who also don't call themselves a science communicator. So we've got people who define themselves as a science communicator who are engaging and increasing awareness and appreciation of science. And these individuals, it's nice to have a community to come together and share ideas. And that's what the Australian Science Communicators may do for this cohort of individuals. But then there are other cohorts of individuals like scientists who feel as though they want to communicate their science better, whether that be to their friends, to their grant proposals, or to the media, whoever it is. They want to be able to communicate their science in a way that is approachable, friendly, and suitable for the circumstances. And having an environment where they're able to work off each other is really, really valuable, and share knowledge. And I think that's what the Australian Science Communicators does, is it brings together these communities and allows people to share knowledge.
And also, thoroughly, there are people who specifically research how science communication is effective, or ways that we might be able to do science communication more effectively in future. And exactly as Joanna was just saying, those researchers are able to share their findings with the people who then make use of that research in their practice when they're doing media interviews, when they're talking to their boss about why we should be including science into the way that we're talking about our risk analysis for the future, or whatever it might be.
That's very interesting, because it's been one of the fascinating things we've had to deal with in the skeptical community since DOT, is trying to communicate to the broader public what we're all about, because invariably people get the wrong idea and they think we're no better than blind believers not believing in things. So science communication, from our point of view, has always been this very tricky topic. And let me go on a funny tangent here. So one of the things that we communicate to the public is people say they think they're a Bigfoot, or they think the Loch Ness Monster is there. And they don't want to hear from us because all they think that we're going to say is, no, it's not there, it's silly, it's just a fantasy, and people who believe it are crazy. Whereas what I'd like to do is I'd like to approach it from a biological point of view. If a creature like a Yowie or a Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster exists, it must be integrated into its environment. It must be part of the ecosystem. And that's how I've overcome that. And people say, oh, yeah, isn't that interesting? I said, well, it has to eat. What does it eat? It has to have a breeding population, a gene pool, a genetic pool. So that's one way I've overcome the problem we have. And I find, and maybe you find this too, if you engage people's interest and suddenly their brain starts to fire off with interest and curiosity, maybe that's a very beneficial avenue.
Yeah. And I mean, like, asking people, questioning their logic can be very confronting. Asking people, saying, these are the statistics. This is the science behind it. Listen to the science. People get quite, taken aback by that. They're like, but I did do research. I looked at the first Google result that came up. And, there was a journal article on it, just one, but there was a journal article on it. So therefore it's truth. And so I think a challenge that we find in the world of science communicating is, how do we tackle that appropriately, respecting that they've got different opinions, but also say, maybe we need to think about this a little bit differently. When we talk about people who don't believe in vaccinations, for example, there's a lot of emotional language that happens around that.
Oh, yes.
And so a lot of science communicators are trying to find ways to be able to use emotional language to their benefit when we're so used to using, facts to support our arguments. And I think that's a really valuable use of science communication, and being able to share that knowledge together to say, well, I've tried this tactic, this works on these types of challenges, but they're not going to work for all the challenges. And I think that's a fun part of being able to, trying to work it together to be like, okay, how are we going to, for lack of a better word, convince someone else to think the same way that we think?
Yeah.
And is it necessary or possible?
That's very interesting. And Tom, I suppose you get scientists from just about every field of science there is in the science communicators.
Yeah, thoroughly. I mean, and it goes a bit broader than what we would typically put in the definition of science itself: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, sometimes psychology. Pretty much the breadth of research-based communications. You could even broaden out. Some of the members of the ASC are involved in actually helping with the communication of the evidence base, so to speak. And I think this goes back to your earlier point around trying to define what science communication is, or the bounds, or the boundary of where we're going to talk about skepticism, for instance.
Yeah.
Science is a very, very broad term in and of itself. And so we do have a range of people from a range of different experiences and expertise who engage in the communication of those fields to play a role in terms of passing knowledge from one place to another, or learnings from one side to the other. But also, as what Joanna was just saying and what we were alluding to before, that there's an increasing reliance on good science communication in relation to behavior change for public policy use, or for us to be able to prioritize where we want to spend our limited resource of federal funding into science research, for instance. That communication of the value or the importance or the impact of science quite often falls to a science communicator as well.
And with that being said, these individuals, they don't have to have a science background to be able to be supporting science. And I think that's really important, is that we're using so many different skills, and different individuals are using their different life skills that they've gained over their, different educational pathways. and using that knowledge to help them communicate science better or communicate those arguments better. And so, you know, like people say to us, well, do I need to have a science degree? Oh, no, I don't have a science degree. That's fine. You can still get the key messages across without having a science degree.
I'm glad you said that. I don't happen to have a science degree, but I've been trying to get the idea of science across now for decades. Folks, if you want to find out more about the Australian Science Communicators, the website is asc.asn.au. But before we go, I happen to notice also that both of you were involved with the wonderful program which is Pint of Science. Can you give me a quick overview for our listeners who might not have heard of Pint of Science?
Well, Pint of Science is an international festival. It started over in the UK. Joanna and I were the national leaders for about 5 years in Australia, and we took a slightly different approach in Australia to the way that other countries have engaged with Pint of Science, thoroughly engaging with the early and mid-career researchers themselves to build up some of these crucial science communication skills in the way that they engage in running events or running a social media page or writing a media release or even just communicating their own research. Because if you think about it, let's say that I am an early career researcher and I come up with this amazing breakthrough that happens to be an mRNA vaccine. All of a sudden, I might get a lot of media interest if my research becomes relevant tomorrow because there might be some pandemic that we're trying to solve. And I know I've not got actually any experience engaging with the general public around what my research actually is. The only experience I've done is through National Science Week or something like that, where I'm talking about fairly fundamental science rather than my actual research or the bleeding edge of what my actual research is. And so what Pint of Science did was it provided an opportunity for those researchers to speak about their current results to a room full of people in a relaxed environment over a pint of whatever you wanted to put in there. And we found that it was actually a very effective way of breaking down some of those barriers. I think one of the most fun things to see would be audience members going up and being shocked that the person that they just ordered at the bar beside was a person standing up out of the audience to give the next presentation, and then them being able to have a chat. So I think it did a wonderful thing in terms of humanizing scientists and sharing the iterative approach to what scientific research is.
Yeah, I think in a few cases it ended up with people getting grant money and new jobs and careers. So it was an opportunity for networking as well amongst it all. So
what a good idea. And it's very reminiscent of what we've been doing for some years now. Skeptical organizations around the world have been having skeptics in the pub. So it's a very similar idea, very relaxed, have a nice pub dinner, some chips and a fish or a chicken and a nice glass of beer or wine, listen to the talk, ask questions and socialize. All very good.
Yeah. So that happens every May. And so people are most definitely, it is continuing on. Joanna and I don't lead that organization anymore. But it is every single May. You'll be able to find it at pintofscience.com.au.
I'll add a link, folks, in this week's show notes for both the Australian Science Communicators and the Pint of Science, both worthy of your attention. And any scientists out there, if you are wondering about how you should communicate, that's the website to go to. Well, Tom and Joanna, I want to thank you very much for sparing some time to talk to the Skeptic Zone. And Tom, I think you will hopefully be talking at Skepticon 2022 in Canberra in early December.
Looking forward to it.
All right. And for now, both of you in Canberra, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and thank you, as ever, to those wonderful people who support the Skeptic Zone. As you heard earlier on in the show, how important it is that people support skeptical endeavors financially. Brian Dunning certainly couldn't do his movie without financial support by friends and fans and so on. And that's exactly the case for the Skeptic Zone podcast. So I do appreciate your support at SkepticZone.tv, where you can sign up for PayPal or Patreon. Now, keep an eye on maynard.com.au. I was just visiting Maynard the other day, and we were filming a new special he's hoping to put out on Saturday. Saturday coming up, Saturday the 22nd here in Australia, and this is a special all about Mary Wilson, the famous British soul singer. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.